Thank you all for coming to this session. This session is drug user organizing. My name is Andrew Reynolds, and I'm the Hepatitis C and Harm Reduction Manager for Project Inform. We're based out of San Francisco, California, and my co-presenter is Jess Tilley. She'll be up here in a minute. We're going to split it up so that I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes on safe consumption spaces, what they are, how they work, why we need them, and then sort of segue into the importance of including people who use drugs in all aspect of safe consumption space work, from the advocacy and organizing to staffing, evaluation, and so forth. And then Jess, who's a really amazing organizer for people who use drugs, will come up and talk from there. Speaking of that one. So I'll do an overview of safe consumption spaces, talk very briefly about the benefits. There's a ton of slides up here, and I'm not going to review all of them. I just wanted them so that you all would have them for future reference. So I'll be whipping through things pretty quickly. But if you want the slides, I've got business cards. You can either email me or the conference organizers will get them for you. But I'm going to start with a question. So imagine you were an alien from outer space, and your planet was in the midst of an opioid crisis, and you came to Earth to figure out ways to help your folks. And what if you were told that there was a public health intervention that did the following things? Oh, those are supposed to be bulleted out one at a time, but okay, that works. So you're looking for something that eliminates drug overdose deaths while also reducing them in the surrounding communities. Minimizes the risk of medical complications from injection drug use, like abscesses, bacterial infections, endocarditis. Minimizes the risk of hepatitis C and B and HIV transmissions. Provides an entry point for people to go into medical care, social services, including drug treatment. Had community benefits, so there was fewer discarded syringes and other related litter, other public disorder concerns. And while doing all of that, saved money. Would you be interested in taking that intervention to your home planet? Yeah, absolutely. And the answer for that, actually, go backwards. So we're looking for alternatives to this. I actually should update this slide because it's no longer 65,000 overdose deaths per year, it's 72,000, over 200 deaths per day in the United States. We're looking for alternatives to HIV and hepatitis C outbreaks. This is the Scott County outbreak from 2015. And it's thought of as an HIV outbreak, but something like 95% of the folks who tested positive for HIV in this outbreak were also co-infected with hepatitis C, and they probably had hepatitis C first, and HIV came into the mix. And then we're looking for alternatives to this. Discarded syringes and other related litter. So what could possibly do all of this? I sort of buried the lead because I already said it. Safe consumption spaces, all right? And safe consumption spaces, there's a lot of different names for them, depending upon what you're reading. Safe injection facilities are commonly used. Those are places where only injection happens. Drug consumption rooms, the word consumption takes into account spaces for people who can smoke their drugs, snort their drugs, even take pills. And then you can just do Mad Libs and move around different words. So safe consumption spaces, supervised injection sites. In Australia, to make it palatable for the general public, they called them medically supervised injection centers. So that was like, ooh, that's a really clinical sounding name. I'm okay with that. The word that you're hearing now in the US that's really quite interesting is just overdose prevention sites. Susan Sherman and some folks at Johns Hopkins did a survey, and they said, are you in support of safe consumption spaces? And folks were like, oh God, no, that's a terrible idea. Then they asked those same people, are you in support of overdose prevention sites? That's a great idea. Let's do it. It's the same thing. You just change the name. I'm going to say safe consumption spaces, but you'll read different things in the literature. So here's the definition, and I'm going to read it. I normally don't read off slides, but we'll just read this one and then move forward. But supervised injection sites are legally sanctioned and supervised facilities designed to reduce the health and public order problems associated with illegal injection drug use. They enable the consumption of pre-obtained drugs in an anxiety and stress-free atmosphere under hygienic and low-risk conditions. Commonly, the purpose of safe consumption spaces, safe injection sites, are to reduce public disorder and enhance public safety, reduce overdose morbidity and mortality, reduce transmission of bloodborne infections, and improve access to other health and social services. The red thing, I like this piece. I mean, safe consumption spaces alone won't solve all of our problems. There's a whole array of things we need to do, not the least of which is including people who use drugs in our advocacy and in our work, and that's what Jess is going to talk about. But safe consumption spaces in the context of a wider network of harm reduction services, from syringe, good syringe access, naloxone distribution, HIV and hepatitis C treatment for people who use drugs, medication-assisted therapy. When you put all of those things into one package, you have dramatic impacts on HIV and hepatitis C outbreaks, preventing new infections, and getting people into care. So here's just one example of what they look like. This is Insight in Vancouver. As you can see, it's a very sort of clean, well-lit, individualized space where people can prepare their drugs and dispose of their stuff afterwards safely. They're all over the world. This slide is actually obsolete because there's so many opening all over the place, but this is Western Europe. You've also got them in Australia, Canada. In response to their opioid crisis, they're opening up safe consumption spaces all over the place. This is just a history slide. There's over 116 in 70 cities throughout Western Europe. The first one was opened in 1986 in Bern, Switzerland, really in response to public injecting. They just wanted to bring folks in to sort of improve the quality of life of everybody. And then lo and behold, this was a remarkable intervention for people who use drugs as well. And as I mentioned, there's a whole array of different things that people will be able to do. Some are injection only. Some have spaces for people who smoke their drugs. And it just depends upon what the local scene is. Like in the Netherlands, for example, there's more people who smoke drugs than inject drugs. So they actually have more smoking spaces in their safe consumption sites than injection sites. There's no sanctioned safe consumption spaces in the United States. In the published literature, there has been a review of one unsanctioned spot in a secret location somewhere in the United States. I call it Someplace USA. But you're starting to see a lot of places who are looking at safe consumption spaces as a way to deal with the opioid crisis in their areas. So Seattle, San Francisco, I actually should update this one too. Philly is on their way to potentially opening one up very, very soon. Ithaca, Baltimore, and so forth. There have been state laws that have passed. The California AB 186, which was a bill that we co-sponsored in California, would have allowed for the legal operation of a safe consumption space in San Francisco. It actually made it all the way through to the governor's desk, and at like 8 p.m. on the last day to sign it, he vetoed it. So that bill did not go through, but he's leaving, and we're going to get a new governor. It's likely going to be the Democratic governor who has already come out in support of this. So we're going to move forward again in January of 2019 to put that into place. And then the thing, one of the things about safe consumption spaces is they offer services more than just drug consumption. And this is an eye exam, given how small those words are. But I mean, as you can see, there's food, there's laundry, there's places to just chill out and socialize with your friends. All sorts of services that are offered to people. So it's an attractive place for folks to come in, not just to use their drugs, but to just hang out and get an array of other services as well. So now I'm going to kind of whip through some of the benefits. And this one right here, like no fatal overdoses have occurred in a safe consumption space. There might be one that's happened in Canada. There's a little bit of controversy around that right now. We're not entirely sure if it was an overdose or another medical consequence. But this alone, no fatal overdoses in safe consumption spaces. Just drop the mic, let's open them, right? I mean, as I said, 200 deaths per day in the United States. At Insight in Vancouver in 2015, there were 768 overdoses at their space. So people will overdose, they're just not going to die because there's going to be oxygen on site to help a person get through it. There's going to be obviously naloxone to reverse that overdose. And then they've done some research in Vancouver and Sydney, Australia, where not only did the overdoses sort of not happen in the space, but in the surrounding neighborhoods and then the city overall, rates of overdose went down. Makes sense because people aren't overdosing in the injection space, but also they would come in and then they would get their naloxone and go out into their communities and be able to reverse overdoses, you know, at their homes or on the streets. Obviously, because it's a space where you're injecting by yourself, there's no risk of sharing any equipment, and so there's reductions in HIV and Hep C prevention. I also want to highlight that last bullet. The Dr. Peter Center, which was an HIV care program in Vancouver, they opened up a safe consumption space for HIV-infected people who use drugs, and like everything for them got better. Their viral loads became undetectable, their CD4 counts went up because they were engaging in care while also going to their space to inject drugs. We don't have good data on that for Hep C treatment, but it makes sense that if you offered hepatitis C testing and treatment at safe consumption spaces, that would be a place where you could treat and cure folks. And as we know, I think there's a session after us, or after lunch on HIV, hepatitis C treatment for people who inject drugs. 8 weeks of treatment now for most folks with 99% cure rates with no side effects. My folks who are taking these meds now and they maybe did interferon, 5-10 years ago, they're like, Andrew, is there really medicine in this thing? Because I feel amazing. They feel like it's a placebo, but no, that's how easy these meds are to take. And so there's really no excuse not to treat people who inject drugs. And safe consumption spaces are a site where you can do that. And then one of the critiques of safe consumption spaces is you're just enabling drug use. That was actually one of the things that the governor of California said, is that these are spaces that just enable drug use. He actually used the word enslave them in their drug use. It was like a case study in how not to write a harm reduction informed press release. But, they actually don't do any of that stuff. There isn't an increase in drug use. Somebody is not walking on the street and they see a big neon sign saying safe injection space. I'm going to try it today, That doesn't work out. So people aren't starting to inject drugs. In fact, a lot of folks shift their drug use. So like, again, in the Netherlands, they've actually demonstrated that people who inject drugs, because there's more opportunities to smoke, they shift towards smoking their drugs, and that becomes an HIV and hepatitis C prevention intervention, because if you're not putting a hole in your arm, the risk of transmission is there. And then even when they're not in the space itself, they're outside in the community, the vast majority of folks decrease their syringe sharing, because A, they have plenty of supplies, and B, they're sort of like, well, if I'm doing this for myself, taking care of myself here, I'm going to take care of myself on the outside as well. It's remarkable what happens when you promote self-efficacy for people. They really do take care of themselves. And then the other critique is, you put this in my neighborhood, and the drug dealers are going to come, the honeypot effect, it's going to become a great mess. And none of that happens. In fact, in Vancouver, folks were dead set against Insight. And then after a couple of months, everybody, including the police, were referring people to come. So I forget exactly what it was, but I think police in Vancouver have become the second highest referral for Insight. And a bunch of folks, that was their first referral. In Frankfurt, Germany, when they opened up a safe consumption space, the local businesses were like, God, no, this is crazy. And then within like 3 months, they were funding the safe consumption space to continue to operate because they're like, people aren't using my bathroom anymore. They're not passed out in my doorway. My business is going up. So again, the quality of life for everybody gets better. And then again, Governor Brown, our governor's enslavement comment notwithstanding, people who go into safe consumption spaces are more likely to get into drug treatment when they're ready to do it. And so it's one of the sort of counterintuitive things that people don't generally think about. But I think if you're working in harm reduction, you know this. If you work with somebody in a decent, humane way, you're engaging with them, and if and when they're ready to enter drug treatment, you'll be able to make that referral to get them there. And it saves money. This is the one thing that, if nothing else, like, you know, if you don't care about people who use drugs, and we all do, but if you don't care about them, you might care about saving public health dollars, and this is one way to do it. And that second bullet is the one that I like to highlight. Alex Kroll, who's this great researcher for RTI International, they just did a simple model in San Francisco where if a single 13-seat space opened up, it would save over $3.5 million. And that would be sort of a decrease in HIV and Hep C infections, reduced use of ambulance and emergency department services. So for every public health dollar that was spent on a safe consumption space, it saved $2.33 that we could then potentially use for other things. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, not only do safe consumption spaces have all of these wonderful benefits, they save money while doing them. And then this is one that I think is really, really interesting, and I can't possibly do it justice. That's why I've got this slide up here. So Cassandra Frederique is with the Drug Policy Alliance. She's the state coordinator. There you go. She's the state coordinator for New York. She's amazing. And Kristen May was with DPA. She's not there anymore. But they wrote this really great piece on the role that safe consumption spaces can play to mitigate against the sort of racist war on drugs. People of color are primarily targeted by police around drug use, and so if we create a safe space for them to use, they have less contact with the police, and that in and of itself is a harm reduction intervention. This is their quote. I can't, as I said, it's one. I actually have it. I carry it with me everywhere I go, so it's just something to read, and I just want to kind of absorb it. I love it. They actually did a really great talk. Cassandra did a really great talk this past week at the Harm Reduction Conference. So as I mentioned, there is one unsanctioned space in the United States. It's been operating now for over 4 years, and it was an organization that just sort of said, you know what, whether these are legal or not, they're the right thing to do, so let's open one up and let's do it. And they worked actually with Alex Kroll to study it, Alex Kroll and Pete Davidson out of UC San Diego. And so in 2 years of operation, there were over 2,500 injections, and I think there were 2 overdoses. The latest numbers, the overdoses have gone up a little bit, but once again, they were all reversed. Nobody died. And then the thing that I like to say about this is it's now been operating for 4 years somewhere in the US, and it hasn't been shut down yet. There's no way the neighborhood doesn't know what it is. There's no way the police in the neighborhood don't know what it is. And it's still running. The sky hasn't fallen. So I think, you know, it's one of those things where there's a lot of concern about taking that first step to open up a safe consumption space, particularly with the current Justice Department and some of the things that were said, particularly when AB 186 was weaving its way through the state legislature. But if and when they open, everybody comes around to them. I think it's taking that first step. There's actually a really good article where I was actually talking about Philadelphia, because as I mentioned, they're actually getting really, really close to opening one up. And I forget who it was. It might have been Leo Beletsky. He was like, so there really isn't a race to be first to open up a safe consumption space. There's a race to be second. Like, we want somebody to take that first step, see what happens, and if nothing happens to that first site, you're going to see them opening up all over the place. This is what it looks like. It's super simple, low-tech, stainless steel tables. There's chucks and bleach to keep things clean. There's always staff present. They collect a minimal amount of data They don't take names, but a little bit of data. There isn't smoking in this particular site. The ventilation issues, and it's much more expensive to run a smoking site than it is to run an injection site. And then not shown in this picture in the back, there's a place with just comfy couches and tables and music and stuff where folks can just kind of hang out and chill. So again, no overdose deaths. With 2 overdose reversals. The vast majority of folks were homeless. They would have been injecting on the street if it wasn't for this particular site. And as I said, no negative consequences in the surrounding neighborhood. There was also one in Vancouver for a while that was run by a peer-based drug users union called Vandu. And it was remarkable. I mean, again, a really cheap, low-cost intervention run by peers, keeping people alive, preventing HIV infections, and it was estimated to save over $4 million in Canadian dollars in healthcare savings. So, you know, whether it's a sanctioned or unsanctioned space, these are really wonderful public health interventions that result in a lot of cost savings. If you're interested in learning more, 2 years ago, Project Inform hosted a think tank where we brought about 50 people from cities that were thinking about opening up a safe consumption space. And these are just a few of the recommendations that we had, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jess to kind of really talk about this first bullet. But, you know, in any work around safe consumption spaces, we want to make sure that we bring in people who use drugs from sort of soup to nuts. You want them in the sort of planning and advocacy stage. You want them to staff these things when they're open, paid a living wage, be part of the boards of them, evaluating them, and organizing around them. It's difficult, but we definitely want to make sure that we have smoking spaces in the ones that we open up in the United States. I mean, you know, it's a little bit more expensive, but you essentially just put a oven vent overwards and it just sucks the smoke right up, or just have it outdoors. You know, instead of a beer garden, we have a smoking garden, you know, something along those lines. But making sure that we include the needs of people who smoke, because they have the similar needs as people who inject. Making sure that we reach out to a variety of folks. I mean, everybody in this room, we're all allies, and if we work together to open these things up, I think we can be successful. And then again, this last one is making sure that we have people who use drugs front and center in this movement, and not sort of playing that sort of politics of respectability game where, you know, it's great to have political support, it's great to have police support, but this is an intervention for people who use drugs that was started by people who use drugs and then became legally sanctioned. And so I think we just need to keep that in our work, and that's where the importance of drug use organizing comes in. Here's some work by Seattle. And if you have any questions or comments, that's my phone number, that's my email. I got business cards too. I remembered business cards. I never remember business cards when I come to a conference, but this time I did. So that's that. I did that in 22 minutes and I had 25 minutes. So we have 2 minutes for questions. Anybody have questions? We could also do it at the end. You want to give Jess as much time as possible because she's amazing. I answered every question already. I'll take it. All right.
Hi, my name is Jess Tilley. I am the Executive Director of New England Users Union and the co-chair of Urban Survivors Union National, which is a national alliance of drug user unions. And I'm also the co-founder of HRH 413, which is a harm reduction best practice consulting firm. And it stands for Harm Reduction Hedgehogs because I raise little hedgehogs. So, and everybody always asks if I have one in my bag, and some days I'm afraid there might be one because I like to run around, but I do not have one today. I put together a bunch of great slides, but when I'm going to kind of flip to one, but I really strongly urge that you guys, if you want to look at them, ask for them afterwards, because looking upon them, there's so much information there, but I really just want to speak from the heart today. And when I do slides, I tend to get lost in my slides and then start talking to myself about them, like, oh, why did I put that in there? So I'm not going to torture you guys with that today. But I am going to put up one that's pretty important, and we can talk about it afterwards. So if you give me just 1 second. I'm going to leave it right there because I think this is really important and we can talk about that afterwards. So my co-founder of USU and myself, we talk about this often, and I like to give her credit even though she says I came up with it first. When I open up and I say, like, if I tell you who I really am, you're not going to hear a word I say afterwards. If I tell you who I really am, and it's about reclaiming my own narrative, because when I talk about myself, and over the years of working in harm reduction, I used to leave out this really important part, and the really important part is I am an injection drug user. And I'm an injection drug user who does not have any shame about that. I don't like to hide it because it's who I am. And yeah, see? And for years, even in the harm reduction movement, it was okay to work with drug users, it was okay to love drug users, but it wasn't okay to be a drug user. And it took us a long time to kind of come to, and I say we because even I, as somebody who provided services, sometimes would have judgment about the drug users I worked with. And I think that's because that's what society tells us, that, you know, we can help drug users, but something's morally wrong with us if we actually choose to admit that we use drugs. And we are a nation of people who use drugs, whether it be coffee, whether it be heroin, it's what we do. Because of where we are in the United States right now, where we have, because of prohibition, because of criminalization, we have a supply that has become poisoned, and our people are dying. And this is a point that it's become so crucial that we really admit what we are doing. We admit that the people we love use drugs, because we're losing people daily. We're losing people in our own harm reduction movement. When it comes to the point that we lost the man who brought all the naloxone into our country, and internationally, who was responsible for hundreds of thousands of lives being saved. When we lost Dan Big, it made us look at one another and say, what are we doing wrong? That we were afraid to admit that Dan died of an overdose. And there's no shame of Dan dying of an overdose. It didn't change the work Dan did. It didn't change what we did as a movement. If anything, Dan would want us to talk about what happened and why we need to change the stigma so that we aren't dying behind closed doors. And I'm choking up as I say this because this man was so important to me. So anyways, what is a drug users union? And as Andrew was saying, it really has to do with language. When I go into places, when I'm working with service providers, I find when I say drug users union, and I'll give an example, like I had NBC call me and they wanted to do a story on drug user unions. And when I explained that a drug users union is simply that, it's a union. I come from an Irish Catholic family with a lot of union organizing. And I was taught if you want to change something, when things are unfair, you organize and you join, you create a union. A union is simply that, it's a group of people coming together with a collective voice to fight oppression, to fight and get what's fair. But I found if you say community organizing, people don't tend to pull the funding from you. So I like to say community organizing at times. But we are simply that. It was introduced to me 20 years ago as a person who was in chaotic use, who found harm reduction and realized that I did not need to be ashamed of who I was, and that I could make a change. And I wanted to give back what was given to me at the first harm reduction program I ever came into, that I was allowed to not tell this punitive story about myself. And in order to get service provisions, I had been taught that I had to lie. And coming into harm reduction, I was loved back into existence. And I was loved back into a human being, and I wanted to give that back. And this was in 1998 at my first harm reduction conference. I met this amazing woman who, I was like, I want to be her when I grow up, and how do I stop using? When she told me that she had never stopped using, yet was so successful, I was like, I can do this. And I don't advocate for everybody, but there was a continuum she had that she explained that, there is a way that you can incorporate drug use into your life if you feel that there's this, that the 12-step recovery just wasn't working for me and I was beating myself down. And she said, you can do the same changes I've done, and it's through union organizing. And I was like, what is this craziness? How do I do this? And it took me years following her advice to come back to Massachusetts and get a small group of drug users together. And at the time, we were being really mistreated in the hospital system in the area. And I always tell the story about how there was a few of us in a room and we all had these horrific abscesses. And later in life, one of the guys who was in the group would actually die from sepsis from an abscess because he would not go back to an emergency room. And I gathered, I was 23 at the time, I gathered a small group, and I said, what do we all share in common? And it was that we face so much stigma. And I said, what can we do to change that? And it was silence. And one of the women said, we can't, we're drug users. Like, we are treated as second-class citizens. And I'm like, this is absolutely wrong. There's no reason we should be treated like this. And that group was across the board, as different as we could be. There was me, who was in a prestigious school. We had a marginally housed man in the room. We had people of color, but we all shared that one thing. We were all ashamed of who we were. And I was ahead of the line because I was the one who was able to raise my head up and say enough. So I became the leader at that point. And I was also a damn good writer. So they said, Jess, could you write a letter to the hospital about how we're treated? And I did, and it was pretty, I look back now and I read it and I was like, oh, I was so full of anger. But it changed. They got scared. They got scared because, a Smith student had written them. And a Smith student who admitted she was an injection drug user, and they were like, what do we do with this? So suddenly we became a union. I had signed it, Massachusetts Drug Users Union. And they invited me in to speak, and I spoke to their board of directors, and it was shocking because the first thing I heard was, you don't look like an injection drug user. And it was like, do you want me to roll up my sleeves? Will that change your thought? Like, I remember speaking to this woman because she, I think as she said these words, she realized what she had said. And it allowed us to have an honest conversation. So she invited me in to start doing sensitivity trainings with their staff. And this was the beginning of change. We were able to sit down, kind of dispel the rumors on both, not rumors, but the stereotypes on both sides. And the feeling of accomplishment that was created in that room that day is something I had never forgotten, and I wanted to carry on to others. So you could fast forward through, I get out of chaotic use, I start working in service provision, and one thing, and I don't know how many service providers we have in this room, but one thing I've always fought for is that if you're providing harm reduction services, and this is how you can begin to get drug user unions going, you have to have a client advisory board. If you do not have a client advisory board, if you do not have a participant advisory board, you cannot provide adequate services for the community you serve. As Andrew said, like right now, drug users' voices are so important in what we're doing. And again, this is why I like to say community organizing and not drug user organizing, because so many of our funders get frightened when they hear that. I was just at a Reclaiming the Narrative, actually, with Leo Beletsky, and I was wearing my other hat that day where people don't know that I'm a drug user. And it was all about reclaiming the narrative. And one of the questions that came out is like, well, when drug users speak, are we sure that they're going to tell the truth? And it was like in the back of the room, kind of like shaking. We had Michael Botticelli there, and it wasn't said out of meanness, and I don't want to say ignorance, it was more like, this is the narrative that the media has fed us for so long. And I was like, we want our voices to be heard. And, I just presented in New Orleans, and the room was so packed that we broke fire code. So, what was so important to me about that is that people wanted to hear what drug users have to say. And it wasn't so much that, at first it was kind of like, ooh, is this ego? Is it everyone coming to hear me? And I'm kidding when I say that. People in the room know me. I have no ego. It was because people wanted to hear what drug users had to say. And we realized, Syringe Exchange was created because drug users came together and they cared about one another and they wanted their community to change. In the height of our overdose, when we're losing more people than we lost in the height of the AIDS epidemic, drug users, once again, we're like, we are sick of our families dying, we're sick of our community dying, and this is where drug user organizing is at the forefront right now. All too often, like I said, at the New Orleans, what I was presenting as, I called it the dog and pony show. We pick one drug user, we trot them out, We ask them to speak. We tokenize them. That's why I created this, and that's why I didn't want to just talk about tokenizing. And then we abandon them. And this is something that's happened way too often in our movement with drug users. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And I've had it happen to me in the early 90s, and that's why I said I refuse to let it happen again. And that's, again, why we created Drug User Union, so that we have so many of us, so many voices, so many collective voices that, that organizations and public health departments can't just keep calling upon that one person. There's too many of us. Our voices have become so loud that they can't ignore us anymore. I sit on so many executive committees, and I think they kind of get scared when I stand up, because they're like, oh, she's going to say again, I'm not the only drug user in Massachusetts. Please, find somebody else. Please, let one of my union members come here. We recently in New Orleans created a movement of drug users where I'd like to say, but the police cut us off. We had about 300 people starting at the beginning of our march, and we came together collectively on a dock. And the outpouring of rage and anguish and loss that came out of all of our souls about everything we've gone through in these past couple of years. And we thought we had seen the end of all the death, and now it's back. What came out of it was so much healing. And when I looked out in the crowd, and like I said, we had created this, Louise and myself, and I thought I was going to be more upset, more sad, but it was absolute healing, that I felt that we had a chance to move forward and perhaps this death could end. And this had all come out of drug users. I was like, actually I got picked up on tape because she was mic'd saying like, wow, we did this. This is amazing. And I was kind of embarrassed because I was like, oops, that got heard. It's going into a film, because I sounded like a 5-year-old at her birthday. But again, with drug user organizing in Massachusetts right now, we have, so to talk a little bit about New England Drug Users Union, we have chapters in all New England states. And when I'm asked to speak about my own chapter, I realize I don't even have time in my area for a chapter. It's kind of like the work is spread out through little bits. Like I co-facilitate a survival sex workers group, because I think all too often in harm reduction we forget about sex workers, and harm reduction was created by drug users and also by sex workers. And we really let our sex worker family down when SESTA and FOSTA happened. We weren't there for them. And that's something I promised as a drug user union, that we will fight for the women and men who are sex workers, who are now forced out into the streets because of SESTA and FOSTA. And I apologize because this microphone, so I keep looking this way and I'm totally avoiding you guys. I don't mean to. I don't have my contacts in, so you're all blurry. And so the sex workers have really joined into the union in our area. And I don't know, well, no, I do know what's going on in Maine as far as fentanyl testing. In Massachusetts, DPH will not pay for fentanyl test strips. Currently, NEUU are the only ones consistently handing out fentanyl test strips, and all of that is paid for out of our own pockets and donations from people in the harm reduction community. Because of the data that our chapter has been able to track ground up, we actually have seen such a change in behavior among drug users. Like the naloxone I was distributing that came directly from Dan, my naloxone distribution through NEU tripled after we started handing out fentanyl test strips, which shows that drug users do care about one another and do care about their community. Where people are not using alone, family members are calling constantly for test strips because it's a tool of dialogue. DPH's pushback was that there is a small room for false negative, and they're afraid that somebody may use. When we hand out test strips, we tell everyone, approach everything as fentanyl. In my area, we have a lot of recreational cocaine use because of the colleges, and we have so many samples of cocaine that are coming up positive for fentanyl. I'd like to say, because of NEUU and fentanyl test strips, we have not had yet, I say yet because I'm scared every time the phone rings at 2 a.m., we have not had a cocaine overdose, fatal overdose yet. The other thing NEU does in our area is, because we have Good Samaritan laws, people, I mean, it's good, you can call, but unfortunately there are many loopholes. People can lose housing, they can have their kids taken away, so we are the ones who are answering phone calls at 2 a.m. and responding to overdoses and working with parents who can't call 911. When we do this, everyone does this unpaid. And so that's a true testament to how drug user organizing can really save even those who aren't involved in drug user organizing. Currently, we're working with the police. One of the models that we had created in Cambridge was to have police officers come in and sit with members, participants. And again, just like in the hospitals, to dispel stereotypes on both sides. And what we saw was overdose rates drop, crime was actually going down in the areas, and arrests were going down. Once again, if you had told me 20 years ago that this would actually happen, that we'd be sitting with police, I wouldn't have believed you. So even the fact that the police have me come in and let me go out the door now and expect, like, you know, I trained with them, is still amazing. The guy who raided my house 20 years ago is now someone I sit on an executive committee with. Lastly, what we're doing, and this ties in with Andrew's presentation, is we have an NEUU SCS task force. I, again, like, never thought I'd see this happen. I personally chased down the head of our DA and was like, hey, I want to talk to you about this great idea. And I like, the most insane word came out of my mouth. I was like, CHELS. And I was like, because I didn't want to say safe injection facility. So I was like, community health, and I can't even remember the acronym, but it's actually an acronym we use. And he was like, did you just call me Chelsea? Like, it was like, so he stopped and he had a coffee and we talked, and he said, send me some evidence. I'm like, oh, here we go. They talk, we die. And sent him a bunch of evidence, you know, studies, and he got back in touch with me. And within 6 months, he had written an editorial supporting safe consumption spaces in our newspaper. And the city even went as far as to co-host a overdose vigil with us and allowed us to bring Safe Shapes in. And for people who don't know what Safe Shape is, it was a kind of like artistic representation of a safe consumption space. The only mistake he made was he turned around and pointed at it, and it's like a big aqua tent, and said, right behind me is a safe consumption space. And I'm like in the background, like, no, because the newspapers were there. But because we had union members there, they were all able to go to the, you know, the paper. So we had like 4 reporters there and explain that, you know, this is not a safe consumption space, this is not an unsanctioned tent. So our union members are the ones that are actually going out and educating the community about what safe consumption spaces are. And I think there's something that's a little bit different when it comes from people who would actually be using these spaces that are talking, rather than people who are studying these spaces. I mean, it's been absolutely breathtaking to watch a community who was absolutely against this be changed by hearing the voices and the true testimonies of people whose lives are different, because, as Andrew had mentioned too, we, the drug users, have been running unsanctioned spots for 20 years. This is not something new. This is not innovative. This is something that we had created to keep ourselves safe. And I don't know what time it is. I don't have a watch, and I don't want to keep talking. Can someone give me a time check? I got 8 minutes. So, yeah, and I want to wrap up really quickly and let you know that nationally, what we're doing as drug user unions, and this is nothing, talking badly about men, but for years, men had run the national movement, and nothing was really happening. And Monique Toole, who's the executive director of Harm Reduction Coalition, we had been in a listening session. She said, you know, Jess, I know everything you've been doing in drug user organizing. I'm wondering why the national movement isn't going anywhere. And so I took that as a challenge. And I got together with Louise Vincent, who runs USU Piedmont chapter, and I said, we've got to change this. And within a year, we had developed a feminist-led, team-based system of drug user organizing, and we took off. We were able to get $23,000 in grant money to bring people to the conference. We were able to bring drug users from across the nation, something had never been done before, and we created the walk I was talking about. And 4 hours before we were about to go out and march, the Proud Boys were in town. If anyone knows who the Proud Boys are, they don't like our type, And we decided we weren't going to let them keep us off the streets, and we still marched. And then one of the reasons we marched is we wanted to talk about, we had created a campaign called Reframe the Blame, and I'm going to wrap up really quickly with that because Maine is one of the states that is being affected. In the 80s, there were laws created against high-end cartel, and now they're affecting drug users. The laws were meant to charge anybody who had distributed drugs that had resulted in a death. And now those laws are being used to prosecute people who are regular drug users, family members, lovers, even in some cases, parents of people who have died of fatal overdose. And if you could imagine being responsible for your best friend's death and the next day being thrown in jail, can you imagine that guilt? And all too often, and I should mention that Louise lost her own daughter 2 years ago to an overdose, and she is the co-creator of this campaign. And we understand that when you lose a child, the rage and the grief can be transformed into power to get justice and revenge. I lost one of my best friends. I can't even say I've lost so many people to overdose, so I can imagine, but one of my best friends. And had I been able the day after to prosecute the man who gave her the drugs, yes, I would have. When I allowed myself to think about it, 2 deaths for one, or 2 lives lost for one is not the answer. We created it. It's basically, it's called a do not prosecute, almost like a do not resuscitate. And we're asking people to sign this order saying, if I should die, nobody can be charged in my death. Because as drug users, too often our voices are not heard in life. And we do not want our deaths to be used as somebody's form of, that's what we called it, reframe the blame. We don't want it to be used to blame someone else. We don't want somebody's lives taken in ours. So right now it's only, it's actually only symbolic, but we had ACLU. I was swarmed by a few district attorneys that were, I was really proud to see more district attorneys at the harm reduction conference that want to make this something legal. And with following the days after it was released, and we've received over, now I think we're up to, with the conference, 2,000 copies, the multitude of parents that contacted us asking, I thought we were going to get a backlash, and the multitude of parents that called saying, is there any way you can help, like my child's best friend, my child's like, there was 2 that were girlfriends that were in jail, can you help them? Because they're facing, it was everywhere from 8 years to 42 years in jail, and everyone, except one, were under the age of 25. So again, these are weird, this is all created by drug users. And I'd also like to say in closing, and I mean it, this is really the closing, that 63% of the people in any UU are in long-term abstinence-based recovery. I was recently attacked online saying that drug user union organizing has to be the single most harmful thing that could be done for the recovery community. And that, I can't even wrap my mind around that. But in the end, because I don't like to attack, I reached out to this man, and in the end, I understood why he was saying, because he had lost somebody to an overdose. And he thought that we were active users advocating for our right to do drugs. And I was like, it's a basic human right, but no, that's not what we advocate for. So I truly believe people in recovery are affected by stigma the same way we're affected in active use. I've seen people who have come from the recovery side over to harm reduction and literally been told they can't work in syringe exchange. They've been kicked out of their recovery communities, which is disgusting. And if we really want to close that gap between the recovery community, the harm reduction community, we have to start working together. We share the same models. I mean, our models are different, but we share the same desire, the same want to keep people alive. Just as harm reductionists do not enable people to keep using, we enable people to stay alive. The 12-step recovery model does the same. And we can't keep fighting one another. And with that, I will close. If anyone has any questions.
Any questions?
I think you have like 1 minute.
It's more a comment, really, just how I really appreciate everything that you're talking about and doing. I am in recovery, but I recently lost my boyfriend to an overdose, and he was in the hospital on and off all year for endocarditis treatment. And while we were in the hospital, I could not believe the stigma that we dealt with. It was so rude. He had a spoon for his yogurt, and it was just a regular spoon, and he had left it, and one of the nurses took it and went to her, the head nurse, saying that it was paraphernalia. It wasn't bent, there was nothing in it, there was no, indication that it was paraphernalia. But because of that, he had to write the statement that everybody who came in to visit him, including me and my son, had to be searched.
Oh, God.
I brought him a little Christmas tree, had to be searched. And when you're going through something like that, that's the last thing you want to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. Give us the hospital. We like to write letters from the union.
Amen.
Well, I'll just say CHELS stands for Community Health Engagement Locations, which is what Seattle wants to call their safe consumption spaces.
That's why I remembered it. I was
It's
like,
the weirdest name you could have possibly come up with.
Hey, Brian Briggs again. Jess, it's always great to hear you. It's great to see you.
see you too.
Well, I really sympathize with what you just said about being in the hospital. Not long ago, my girlfriend, we've been living together for years, and she's not doing so well, and she's an injection drug user. And she got really sick, not dope sick, just sick. And she started getting a temperature of like 104. She was bent over in pain. And she hates going to the hospital because she gets so stigmatized there. It's like a nightmare. Like she doesn't even want their drugs anyway. Like she, they think she wants drugs and she doesn't want, Percocet? It's not even gonna work for her. If she goes, she needs treatment, right? And so she went and she sat in the ER. I mean, ambulance up, we got an ambulance. It was really, thought she was gonna die. And she sat in the ER, and I went out after a couple hours to find a nurse. And one nurse came in and said, "Oh, we'll be right back." And then I asked for another nurse, and she came in, and she said to me, she said, all of a sudden, "We have patients here who are actually sick." And she kind of slipped up when she said it. And I said, "What?" I'm like, "She has like 103 temperature. Look at her. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Why did you say that? Why on earth would you say that?" I got really mad. So to cool down, I went out and had a cigarette. But she called security. They wouldn't let me back in the ER. So I had to wait outside. I didn't know what was going on with her. Then they called the police on me. So I had to leave the hospital. And they left her sitting there for like 10 hours. And then when a doctor finally came in, he thought she needed emergency gallbladder surgery, but she was in withdrawal, severe withdrawal at that point. So she just up and left, and she hasn't been back. Until we stop stigmatizing drug use, we're not going to stop stigmatizing anything, I don't think. The stigmatization of drug use in this country is actually kind of a recent phenomenon, It used to not be like that. It's all connected to political things. The first laws against drugs were started in San Francisco, I think in 1896, with a guy who was running for mayor who declared that, people of Chinese, descent could not have opium anymore because they might be using it to enslave white women. Mm-hmm. So white people were still allowed to have opium and smoke it. It was only the Chinese that couldn't, right? And he won. The guy won the race. And since then, we've continually stigmatized drug use in order really for political gain but before that it was when the Harrison narcotics law was passed, the first people that were arrested in mass weren't addicts. They looked at it, they had a health problem. It was they had a health issue. The doctors got arrested. A lot of people don't realize that. It was all the doctors that got arrested, And I really like also what Jeff said about the 12-step community and harm reduction. People think they're mutually exclusive right off the bat, and we fight. And literally, you know what? This is a desperate time. So whatever works for you, use it. 12-step works, then go for it. No one's trying to say don't do that. Like, do whatever works for you. Everybody's different, you know? So, just, I love hearing you speak, you know? It blows people's mind. I think a lot of people don't even take you seriously sometimes. They're like, what? You know? But it's just the truth. Like, you know, for years, a lot of people didn't realize I was an IV drug user. Like, wait, what? Like, everybody's perception changed in an instant. It was amazing. You know, I was like, oh, so now I'm just a different person. Like, you know, and it's just perception. And where does that perception come from? Where does all this stuff come from that we're thinking about drug use and drug users, you know? I'm not trying to encourage drug use. Obviously, there's some bad things associated with it, terrible things. But where do these perceptions come from, you know? Like, I really had to start looking at that myself, too. Anyway, I'll stop. I tell you, I can keep going. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. Let's give our speakers a hand.